Welcome friends. Today we're playing with a really simple watercolour colour palette. We're playing with just grey and pink and then together you can see that they create such a soft, subtle, sophisticated style. And we really don't need to get fancy. We can play with just those two simple colours and lots of water and create really something that's quite fun and special. Would make a really beautiful gift card or bookmark for someone you love. Would even be lovely on a grander scale, or even with a passepartout, so a little mat, and you could hang it on the wall, so it would be really simple and fun. So this is for a really basic beginner. As you can see, the way I'm painting, I use one brush. I don't use expensive products. I don't use expensive brushes. This is one that I picked up in Barcelona on a holiday. You'll hear me mention this a lot if you have watched my previous YouTubes. It is one I picked up on a family holiday and I just loved. It is not an expensive brush. It is about a 9 from memory, but it has this really sweet tip, so you'll see me using that a lot throughout to create the little sweet branches on the trees and little fence palings and that kind of thing that you can see in this landscape. It really is a little bit abstract and fun. I've used a really lovely Mont paper, which is my favorite brand to use. It's a 190 GSM. Again, it's a really inexpensive pad. So don't feel that you have to spend a lot of money in order to have fun. This is something you could do as practice. This would be something that you could use to fill up your sketchbook, or it could be something greater that once you shut that book up, once it's dry, of course wait till it's dry. But once you shut that book up and just put something heavy on it, or just stack it underneath your other sketchbooks, it all flattens out beautifully, and you could add that nice fat mat that gave a really wide border to this and put it in a beautiful frame, or even an inexpensive one, and have something beautiful to put on your wall. I have slowed this down, fastened this up a little bit, because otherwise the process is like seriously it takes me probably about half an hour to create this. The first part I made a little bit faster, just where I was putting in the background the wash and adding in a little bit of color. This one is actually in real time, this part, so I'm going to talk nice and slow through this. As you can say, we're just feeling our way through lots of little bits and pieces. I will start with some colours just because I've kind of skipped on. It's a very simple colour palette. I had it already pre-mixed, and when my colours dry, I never clean my palette. I do tend to use lots of colours that I've used and then just add a little something to that. So the peachy pink that you see is actually mixed with a Quin rose, so that's number 366. I use Royal Talens paint, so I do use really beautiful paints that my beautiful husband and daughter bought me for Christmas. So I previously used student quality paints, so this is my first time jumping in and using professional quality paints, but still very affordable, and they come in a beautiful timber box, and actually even came with brushes, but I always go back to this one. It just has a place in my heart, so I always pick up the same brushes, even though I have more expensive thicker and thinner brushes. I come back to this one. So the peach you can see is a mix of the quinacridone rose and a yellow ochre, just a little bit mixed together until I'm happy with the shade. You can try that out on a spare piece of paper, or like me, just I always see what it looks like when I dab it off on my paper towel and make sure I'm happy with it. I have added in a little bit of white, a little bit of the Chinese white, just to soften it down, but as you can see, mostly it's just adding in the water to soften that color, to dilute that color. The grey is literally just Paynes grey. It's just simple Paynes grey with more or less water. You can actually see my half pan there sitting next to my hand on the right side in the paper towel. So I do use it sometimes in the full strength, but I am painting wet on wet. So you can see the paper has got some movement in it, but again, the one that you can see that I created first on the left that I've got pegged on there, I did create that the night before, just playing while I was sitting down with my loves in the evening. So I did prep that one and have a little bit of a play with that. So each one's going to look a little bit differently. But as you can see, that's flattened out nicely overnight, just closing the book. I didn't put anything heavy on it. It was simple as that. So I have not used any pencil sketches to start this one. I literally just set up my nice little scene with some of my textiles in that beautiful raindrop at the top, on one of my favorite Venetian plaster backdrops, and some of my little essentials that I have, and just started to paint. So I painted a really loose square in. I love that it's not perfect, definitely my style. And then I put a really simple Paynes grey wash in, which was just Paynes grey diluted like massively with heaps and heaps of water, and I added that in loosely, and then while it was very wet, I added in that beautiful peach that I had mixed up, just to pop in a little spot where I'm thinking, you know, clouds might be, where the landscape would meet the sky, just the patchiness that you would expect from Mother Nature. Nothing that's perfect. It's just not how our world is created, and it's definitely not how I paint. So, and then I've just come in as it's dried. You do see me kind of feel and test it in a couple of places sometimes, just to see how wet it still is, because I was painting quite quickly, although you can see my head peeping in there off and on. Apologies, my doll, I'm still trying to work out best position for videos and things like that, and I don't have extra helpers to help me do that. I do all of it myself, position it, and then just point and shoot as I create. So you can see my little bits of my hair blowing in the fan, so it does dry quite quickly when you have the overhead fan on, but I live in a very tropical climate, so it's just far too hot in my studio without the fan on at present, and I can't paint with an aircon blowing on me. It drives me crazy. So you may find too that if you're painting in a tropical climate, or even if you're somewhere where it's cold and you've got a fire on, just be careful that it does affect how you paint and how your paper dries, and it does take away some of that spontaneity of having that beautiful bleed and blend, which is exactly what we want. We want the blooms as we pop that wet into wet, so it does affect that if you're it is affected by your climate, so just be aware of that, and in this case it certainly did for me. So I have to just be, you can see me sometimes when it's actually dried a little bit more, I'll just go in and grab a little bit more just plain water, and then just wet it down a little bit. You can see me here dipping just straight into the pan of Paynes grey, just to add a little bit of shadowing and a little bit more depth, as you can see at the bottom again, where as it's bled and as it's dried, it will always dry lighter. So I've added a little bit more depth in as required, and then I'll just let it do its thing. I'll let the watercolours do its thing, and then come back in and add a little bit more as I feel it's necessary. I do take a little bit of that moisture off as if I feel that it's a bit too wet. Add in some nice shading here just to give the border a little bit more definition. My intention is to kind of have like those vertical lines are a little bit like a fence palings in outback. That's my thought process, being in Australia and that being my world. But other than that, lots of little sweet trees and shadows, and just playing with the colours and blending them together and letting them do their thing. Certainly no real plan, just adding in a little bit more of the actual vanishing point where the land meets the sky here, adding in a little bit more of that peach to blend it through, and then, as I said, this one's in real time, so you can see me thinking it through as I'm creating. It's definitely not something that has been pre-sketched. I'm kind of following the pattern or the design that I'd previously created, but not too heavily. My style is very loose. I'm really feeling my way through, so hopefully if you're creating with me, and I do see that a lot of people asking for real-time videos, so I didn't want to speed through this, I wanted to share the actual process. Again, watch my head peeping through there, so I do apologize. Getting better with the videos and not popping my head in. This is actually going to be a 2-part series, so I have actually created a little landscape on the first one, and the second one's actually some leaves on some branches just kind of falling down, so that will be quite nice. I'm going to do that as a 2-part, so I will link the two below each other, like the landscape below the leaf and the leaf below this one, once I get them uploaded and the audio all done. And you can see here I'm just adding a little bit more of that peach into the sky, thinking about how the clouds look over here in beautiful sunny Queensland, Australia, when the sun rises and the sun sets. In particular, we get this beautiful pink glow in the sky, and the clouds, let's be honest, you look at clouds so often and you think, my goodness, if I painted that, people wouldn't believe that it was real, and yet it just is. We're so blessed to have the most amazing sunrise and sunsets and the most amazing landscape. So as you can see, I've just added in a little bit more here, wet on wet, just feeling that the shadowing there below the palings is a little bit, it's too straight. It needs to be a little bit messier, a little bit more abstract, a little bit more natural. So just shadowing that through, adding a little bit more water where I feel it's needed, but I don't depart from that colour palette. I've just kept the Paynes grey with lots and lots of water and a little bit of a blemish here and there, a little bit of a dark patch as it's dried, and as so you can see me, that's dried up there on the clouds now with the fan on, so I'm just adding in a little bit more of the diluted grey. You can see I'm only picking up a tiny bit in the actual tip of my brush, because you will notice that this brush in particular picks up an awful lot of moisture. It really, really does absorb a lot, which is great if I'm doing something that's big like the wash. But if I'm trying to have the detail and have that real precision, I don't want my page to get just big blots of moisture that aren't controllable. So just be mindful of different brushes pick up different amounts of water, they just do. So be mindful of how much moisture is on your brush. You can always just take it over. Always have paper towel. Always have paper towel handy. And just be mindful that sometimes you just need to blot that brush, take off a bit more of the moisture, pick up a little bit less on your tray. This tray does tend to bleed together and bead. So it's quite a new set, so I need to do look at some processes for so when I'm mixing the paint, it doesn't bead, it stays a little bit more spread out so I can see the colour better. It's starting to do it automatically with the more use it gets, but I'm going to have a bit of a play and see if I can either sand the plastic slightly to allow it to be a little bit less shiny, and there's obviously like a finish on the plastic. So I'll share that process with you as soon as I have a moment to do that. I always sit down to paint and then forget that I haven't done it. So here you can see I'm just adding that, bringing that line down, because I am going to make sure that that square is a beautiful little artwork unto itself, and that there it is, all ready to go. Thanks so much.